NCAA tournament has been canceled.
Basketball courts left empty.
This decision is based on the evolving COVID-19 public health threat.
Stories with chapters left unwritten.
Chioza.
Experiences and opportunities lost.
Just think about how many people, how many universities this impacts.
We've waited. We've been resilient. And now we're back. (1,020 student athletes, 67 games, 6 venues, all in one place. In 49 states, it's just basketball. But this is Indiana. It's time to make history with the game we love. Heartbreaking losses, Cinderella stories,
The dream is alive.
buzzer beaters,
Puts it up.
68 teams, one dream. Championships, confetti, nets, trophies. Let's dance.
Greg, thank you for being here for the first ever Final Four talks as the Executive Director of the NABC. Obviously, you represent the largest professional association with 5,000 plus coaches. You're talking of guardians of the game and instilling these foundational values in people, which I think is tremendous. But from your life, right, who were those early coaches or the ones that set foundational values for you?
Yeah, well, Neelay, first of all, let me thank you and the NCAA for having me on. I think this is a terrific idea, and I'm really looking forward to participating in this program. And, you know, when I look back at who my foundational coaches were, you know, I have to start with my parents.
Sure.
Right? So they were my first coaches. And I think they're everyone's first coaches, even though you don't necessarily look at your parents as coaches. But I would have to say that they were the first ones there who instilled sort of our family values. They were the ones who got us, my sister and I, started on the path to where we ended up doing some really cool things.
So what was it like, you know, south side of Chicago? I know your dad worked a lot as well. So what was that like for you growing up, having that presence of him and your mom?
My mom was a stay-at-home mom, right. And my dad worked for the city of Chicago. Right. So he was what was called a stationary fireman, yeah. But it was a typical blue-collar job at the water department. He was disabled. He had MS, and from my earliest memories of my dad, he always walked with a limp, and it got progressively worse over the years. But having said that, it did not stop him from being the dad that, you know, that I wanted to model my parenting after. He got up and went to work every day, never complained, was at all of our events. He would come home, and he worked a swing shift. So he worked 6 days on days, 6 days on afternoons, and 6 days on nights. And on the days where he worked and he got home at a regular time, we'd be outside playing. Yeah. Or if he worked nights, he would stay up till we went to school. So, I mean, he was always around.
So how did your mom complement sort of his absence as well during those times?
She sort of made sure we kind of grew up with some discipline, some rules, and stuck to it. The house was filled with unconditional love, a real striving for excellence, but not in a pressured sort of tiger mom way. Yeah. You know, my mom was the type of mom who you would come in and do your homework, and she would say, did you do your best? And she would never get on you for not getting an A. She would only get on you for not getting an A when you were capable of getting an A.
Yeah, yeah.
she would back you into excellence
Yeah.
without the pressure. And so another thing that I learned from my mom and my dad was how to be philanthropic when you don't have a lot of resources, because they were philanthropic with their time, not only with us, but with kids in the neighborhood. And when she saw that I got through with my work, she said, you should be helping other kids with their work. And so that's where my sort of philanthropic character comes from.
You mentioned your mom being the disciplinarian. Did she treat you and your sister the same, differently?
You know, she did not. And that is not a negative thing.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you why. I was born in 1962. My sister was born in 1964. So we came up during what was still sort of a civil rights, highly aware civil rights time, where young Black men had to be careful when they were out in the world by themselves.
You mentioned a line to me earlier that just bothered me at the very core. And you said your mom raised your sister to be that independent, fierce, successful woman, and she raised you not to get lynched.
Right, right. She raised me not to get lynched. And she used to say that. She's like, you can't go out here and act a fool, because young Black men will get killed doing that. They raised me to survive that world as a Black man, and they raised her to be an independent, strong Black woman.
At the same time, you became a father for the first time as well, right? So one more big milestone. Now you're not just someone's son or husband. Now you're responsible for another human being.
Yeah.
Scary?
Not only was it scary, you know, I had heard my mom say, they don't teach you how to do this. Yeah. Well, they don't. And I was thinking, man, here it is, early 90s. I got to raise this boy to be a man. And the situation wasn't much different than it was when I was younger. Yeah. So I had to kind of to show him some of the things that my parents had to show me to sort of keep him out of harm's way.
I remember the only time in my life I've spontaneously cried is when my son was born, right? Mm-hmm. And it's that overwhelming emotion, and you know that you can't fail. Like, you want to do everything you want to do at the time to take care of them, to protect them, often at your own expense. And something your sister told your now wife, Kelly, is that if I ever ask you how things are going, don't tell me everything is fine.
Yeah.
And you're the guy who always said that during those years.
When my first marriage was sort of ending,
yeah,
I didn't tell anybody because I always hoped that it would work out. I was acting like everything was fine. And my sister, when she found out that things weren't going fine, she was madder at me than she was at anybody else. Yeah. Particularly men keep their issues inside. We are not natural partakers in the mental health aspect of our lives until we absolutely have to. And that is something in our socialization that I see changing nowadays, because people are more aware and there's more information out there. But growing up, my dad sort of kept the issues inside. I have done the same thing. My male friends who have gone through divorces and tough things in life have done the same thing. But you can't be afraid to reach out for help. And it's not just help, physical help, you need mental help.
You had friends that were pouring into you, and you had your group of people that were sort of helping you get through that as you were making a really big transition.
Yep.
And you went from banking to basketball again.
Right. My dearest friends all thought I was having a nervous breakdown, because here I am, and like I said, I was in an industry making a lot of money for a young guy. But the whole time that I was in the banking industry, I wasn't all in, because it's really a zero-sum game, right? If you're winning, somebody's losing. And that just wasn't my makeup. And deep down, I still was going back to that coaching. My former college assistant coach Bill Carmody, who was the head coach at Princeton, got the head coaching job at Northwestern in Chicago. And by then I was working in Chicago. And he called me up out of the blue. Well, he was calling me up to offer me an assistant coaching job.
Wow.
At a Division I college. And I was stunned. By now, my first marriage is, I'm going through a divorce now. But I have 2 kids. And I'm trying to figure out if I can take this job, because in my mind now, I'm going from making what I'm making to making 1/10 of what I'm making as an assistant coach. In my mind, I'm trying to figure out if I can do it. And I'm like, yeah, I can do this, but I want to talk to some people. So I talked to the 2 people who I would go to for advice, my mom and my sister.
Yeah.
And so they both barrels, they handed to me like, what is there to think about? You should be doing what you like doing. And if Dad was alive and he told you to do it, you'd have done it by now. You won't want to listen to us because we're women, and that's my sister. That was my sister. She was just going all in. But she really hit me with you should do it because you love doing it.
Yeah.
It was never about the money for me, because after you sort of buy a couple of the things you want, you realize this is just stuff.
It's
that, and so I was more worried about my kids, who were 8 and 4 at the time. I get them in a room and I say, well, guys, I think Dad's going to get another job. And I said to them, Dad's going to be a coach. And I was waiting to hear their response, because if they, and I'm worried about the wrong things. I'm worried about the house, big house you have, the nice car, the nice vacations. They're going to miss all of this. That was what was going through my mind. Stuff, yeah. Right? 8 and 4. 8 and 4, and I'm worried about stuff. Well, they put me in my place, because and so I say that, and my 8-year-old says, and who's a boy, says, calmly, he paused, and he said, does this mean that your office is a gym? And I said,
how awesome is that?
How
awesome is that?
It was so neat, yeah. Because it also made me feel like a chump, yeah. Because there's just kids. Yeah. They don't care. They just want you to be around. And I said, well, my office won't be in the gym. It won't be a gym, but it'll be next to the gym. And he said, cool. And my daughter, right after he was done, she said, do they have a pool there? And I said, yes, they do. And they were like, oh, sounds good. That's when I made the transition. And
you, of course, successfully transitioned, but you had 2 very different coaching experiences, from Brown and Ivy League, yeah, to Oregon State and basketball. What were those experiences like?
They were both great experiences, and but just different institutions.
Sure.
And both sets of players want to be in the NBA if they could. But for both places, what I learned is I needed to manage they were just like my 8 and 4-year-old. They were just kids,
yeah,
who were trying to get through this adventure, and hopefully, and I'm hoping they come out on the other side as better people. And what I tried not to do was try and recruit somebody who should have been at one school to my school.
Yeah.
I tried to be honest that way, because it's hard enough recruiting kids who want to be with, getting kids who want to be in the situation you have, because there's other people who have similar situations.
Yeah.
When it comes down to it, they're kids, they're individuals.
Yeah, and that last piece is critical, because I feel like the moment you said Brown, in my mind, I'm slotting them in that box, right? Here's the guy or gal in general. That's what they're going to do or not do.
Right.
And if you're here for basketball, and we're starting to compartmentalize them.
Yeah. And that was one of the things that I learned in coaching. A lot of the stuff that I brought to coaching, I brought from parenting.
Yeah.
One of the things that I learned from my players and learned from the coaching experience is to not compartmentalize my players.
Yeah.
Because it's easy to do.
It is.
But what you realize when you get them on your campus and you get them in your lives, each one of them is an individual and they have to be coached individually. And while we're on the topic, another thing that I learned was this mental health aspect of how important mental health is in the lives of the kids you bring into your program.
Yeah.
And that, along with an empathetic view of the situations they're coming from at the same time, those kind of go hand in hand.
When you were coaching though, one or two people you knew were slightly famous. What was that pressure like? Because I'm sure every action of yours was under a scanner in some ways.
It was, it is, and it will be from now on. That's the interesting thing about, when you have family members who are famous, and I only know this now. I didn't have this growing up. We weren't a political family. When my sister met Barack, he was talking about being in politics.
Right.
But nobody could have ever thought he was going to be president of the United States.
Sure.
No way, right? And nobody would have ever thought my sister would have been the first lady. And I was already coaching. So that's public enough. When you walk into a building and people immediately know your politics, that is another level. It didn't phase the work because if you're being authentic, people know who you are anyway. What I didn't want it to do is to have an adverse effect on the team or the players.
Sure.
So I always went out of my way to sort of make sure that they were in a safe space.
Yeah. All credit to you. You've been successful as a coach and done a lot of great things, but I'm sure you'll be the first to admit this doesn't happen without a really supportive partner behind the scenes.
Oh, absolutely. You can't have a job as a coach by yourself.
Yeah.
My wife, Kelly, was just as much involved in the recruiting and in the family feel that our team had.
Yeah.
You cannot do a team, let alone a regular life, if you don't have a supportive partner and understands team, understands sacrifice, compromise, discipline. So we make a good partnership.
You're now in a leadership role with the NABC. One of the big pieces you've done is add another core value.
Yes.
Talk to me more about that.
Yeah, so the NABC has always had 4 core values: advocacy, education, service, and leadership. We have 4 core values, and we're in a sport with 5 players. It would be kind of cool to have a 5th core value, and it was easy to come up with a 5th one based on what we're dealing with now.
Yeah.
And our board unanimously approved us adding the 5th core value of inclusion, which is so timely.
Absolutely.
And it runs the gamut from equity to socioeconomic, racial. Just there's so many ways that our coaches can really push that core value, and we can push it as an association.
So now you're influencing the influencers, right? The coaches itself.
Yeah.
And you've come in at a time when, especially post George Floyd last year, you've seen this as well with the Derek Chauvin trial happening right now too. There is a whole different level of conversation around race reconciliation, and you have a committee on that.
Yeah.
And you're talking a lot more in your core values about that.
Right.
So where does the NABC go from here?
The NABC is it's been a wonderful organization, and I've had the pleasure to be a part of it as a coach. Once I got hired, I inherited. It was right after the George Floyd incident. As a result of the George Floyd incident, the NABC board and the executive director came up with a committee on racial reconciliation.
Yeah.
And that committee I inherited, and they had started kind of these processes, and they were absolutely terrific. Standardized tests. There was the Mclendon Leadership Initiative, which was started by a few of the coaches. And what these coaches came up with was a great idea on how to get more people in the pipeline. So what our coaches have done is they're sponsoring positions in athletic departments for young African Americans to sort of be exposed to the industry and hopefully have a chance to be hired by some of these places and sort of start filling the pipeline. We're lobbying politicians on getting African American studies be a required curriculum in both high schools and colleges. And then we did a huge voter registration and education initiative that was national this year, that was done by a group of assistant coaches. So we are trying to do as much as we can to combat this, these different issues of racial injustice. My job is to sort of help lead that, but to also be out in front for the coaches and letting our coaches be able to spend more time developing our student athletes.
Yeah. You know, as a former coach yourself, to current and potential coaches, is there anything you look back on your coaching career and say, I wish this were different?
So, you know, we have different levels. So we have the Division I guys that everybody sees, but you know, we have a lot of Division II, Division III coaches who are real teachers.
Yeah.
And there is part of our game where the coaching has turned into a profession, where we've lost the teaching part, and the goal is winning as opposed to developing.
At all cost.
Yeah. And I hearken back to when coaches were teaching, because that's what made me want to get into it, because I had some good coaches and some good teachers and who helped me get to where I am today. And just, it feels like we could help a lot more people that way. That's part of my job too, is to remind people that we've got thousands of coaches who are out there coaching kids who are graduating and going on to be professionals in something other than their sport.
If you think legacy, right, how would you want people to look at your impact or remember you and think of you?
I want people to feel like we've added value to the organization and to coaches, and that really that people look at coaches in a positive light again. You know, coaches have taken a little bit of a negative hit here in the recent past, and I as I mentioned earlier, I think coaches are a big part of all of our lives, because you don't necessarily have to be on a team to get coached. But I'm just hoping that this organization, we put it on a path where it can evolve with the times and not get stuck in one place.
And from your life journey, if there's one thing you want people to take away, what would that one thing be?
Everyone should absolutely try doing something they love for a living. So when they decide not to do it and do something for money, they'll know what they're missing. I
want to say it is refreshing to be in front of a live person again.
Right.
Even as we're socially distanced. But there is hope. And I want to thank you and, of course, the NCAA and everyone else that's helped put this on as well. Greg, thank you very much.
Thanks, Neelay.
Belief does not always start within us. It is given to us. I believe the greatest gift one can give is believing in someone. When I was 8 years old, I was playing football, City League Championship. 4th down, 10 to go, in overtime. The coach calls the play, my number, I'm the quarterback, calls the quarterback keeper. I tell the coach, I can't score. We need to do something else. The coach puts his hand on my shoulder, looks me in the eye, and says, son, you will score. Go out there and do it. I did, and I scored. That coach happened to be my dad. You must believe in your kids, because belief in your kids will help them believe in themselves. My dad has always been that source of belief in me, And that's something that has gone throughout my life with my parents and loved ones that believe in me. Graduate school, Ohio University Sports Administration program. I knew I wanted to be in athletics, one of the best programs in the country. At the end of every year, they have a symposium where all of the alumni come back that are working in the sports field. I was anxious and excited about this because this would be the first time I would see people that look like me that are working in the business in college athletics. I walk into the ballroom, 300 people plus. I look around and no one looks like me. I was disappointed, I was shocked, I was hurt. I went to the bathroom, went into a stall, sat on the ground, and I cried. There's one person I thought to call, Mama. I called my mother and told her, Mama, I am not going to become an athletic director. She asked me why. I said, because I'm here and there's no one that looks like me. She said, are you by yourself? I said, yes. She said, son, wash your face, get up, and get back out there. Now, that's not the response I was expecting from my mama. I was expecting, it's okay, baby, it's going to be fine. Get up, wash your face, and go back out there. She told me, you will become an athletic director. And not only that, when you become an athletic director, you're going to come back to this very same symposium, and you're going to be the example for others that look like you so they don't have to feel like you feel now. That is what you're going to do. My mother saw something I could not see. Do you know how hard it is to be the only one of something? Going in that room, 300 people, only one person, and no one looks like you. It takes belief and others believing in you to help you see it through. So I was fortunate enough to get through school, and now I've been in a business and I'm ready to become an athletic director. I interviewed one time, I interviewed twice. I'm close, and I think I'm right there on the cusp. Then rejection 3, rejection 4, rejection 5, rejection 6 comes. At this time, I'm having a serious crisis of doubt. I don't think it's going to happen. After the 8th rejection, my wife, Jessica, says to me, you need to do something differently. It's not working. I asked, what do you have in mind? I prepare so much for my interviews. After every interview, I would get in the car and write down questions. I would research those questions. I would research the institution. I would analyze what it is they need, and I would do my best job of trying to be what they needed at the time. She told me, instead of thinking and trying to be what they want or what you think they want, how about you tell them who you are? Being your authentic self. She helped me see that I am enough. So for that next interview, when Boston College called, the first question I got was, tell us something about yourself that we can't learn from your resume. And my response was, everything is earned. Nothing has been given to me. She believed in me, that I was enough, and that was so important to me becoming what I would become. I had 3 terrific years at Boston College. Then I was afforded the opportunity and privilege to lead the athletics program at UCLA. Now that I am in this role, I work hard to provide opportunities for people, to believe in people, to believe in those that I serve, those that I work with. That is very important, because I am who I am because of the people that believed in me. One of the initiatives that we've done is, for football, we have scheduled 2 historically black colleges and universities for the first time in school history. There are many positives to this. From a fan engagement perspective, providing a different experience for our students and our student body, it's an exciting, and the communities, it's an exciting time. but also what I'm allowed to do and able to do and want to do is provide opportunities for men and women of color from that football program, from that spirit program, from that band to come to Los Angeles and have someone believe in them that they belong at the highest level. That is belief. If you're in the workplace, believe in your colleagues. If you're a partner, believe in each other. If you are a coach, believe in your students. And if you are a teammate, believe in each other. And if you're a parent, believe in your kids. Because if you believe in them, they will believe in themselves. The greatest gift one can give is belief in someone else.
It was more than 15 years ago when I learned the real meaning of madness through the NCAA Final Four in San Antonio. As a graduate student at Ohio University, majoring in sports administration, I had an opportunity to experience the Final Four as part of my research, visiting some side events, including a basketball clinic with workshops to teach kids teamwork. The 3 years in the United States gave me a chance to expose myself to broader views and the experience of being a minority. I also learned about the great yet complex history and culture of the country, including inequity. I had played basketball for more than 20 years, so the first thing I did on campus was knock on the door of the athletic department to ask for opportunities to help the Ohio University basketball team, which, by the way, won the MAC championship this year. Just days later, I found myself at the convocation center, keeping side scores. And weeks later, the head coach generously introduced me to his friend working in the NBA, who I went to meet in San Antonio. My first experience with March Madness turned out to be a very memorable one, because with incredible excitement, I was able to meet with an NBA executive, the first significant step towards making my dream come true. After several applications and some 7-hour straight drives, I was privileged to get my break with the Detroit Pistons as the first Japanese woman working with NBA on the business operations side. It was a life-changing experience working with their community relations division, and I got to see at firsthand how basketball was being leveraged to affect positive change in the communities. I still remember the excited yelling by the kids when they found NBA players at reading timeout events, and I cannot forget their starry eyes while reading books together with the players. With such priceless experience and knowledge of sports marketing, I went back to Japan in 2006, aiming to contribute to Japanese sports industry. I established my own consulting company in 2010 and also launched a nonprofit Sport for Smile to empower socially marginalized people harnessing the power of sport. However, when I told people that I was working with NBA, the question most asked was, "Were you cheerleading?" I was flattered for a moment, but then I thought of something more important. I need to change this. But my plate was quite full already, so I couldn't think of starting anything new until 2015, when the new Japanese Pro Basketball League was created. With the historical event in Japanese basketball, I took inspiration from my mentors and sports business executives who gave me the golden opportunities, such as NCAA Final Four, NBA drafts, and Basketball Without Borders. Every time I thanked them. They always said to me, "Pay it forward. Do the same thing for young people." That's why I established my next big pivot to empower women in Japan seeking a career in sports business, mainly in basketball. While Japan has regarded as a developed country, when it comes to gender equality, it's got a long way to go, ranking 121st out of 153 countries in 2020, according to the World Economic Forum. In fact, if you go to sports business seminars and events in Japan, only 10% of the audience are women, and it's not unusual for no female speakers to be on the stage. That has been a common landscape of Japanese sports industry, unfortunately. The Future Front Women project that I launched in 2016 and implemented in New York and LA so far has provided young women in Japan with opportunities to visit US to be inspired by female leaders of top sports organizations in person. I wanted to give them opportunities like I was given, and I was rewarded when one of the participants thanked me, saying the experience was life-changing for her. Around the time when the first female vice president was elected last year, I was contacted by a young Japanese woman excitedly telling me that she was hired by a WNBA team with their sponsorship division. So now I can proudly say I am the first Japanese woman working with the world's top basketball league's business operations. But I am not the last. To commemorate this, I have decided to launch a new project called Heart Pivot, providing women at Japanese pro leagues with speaking opportunities and presentation trainings so they can be more confident to speak in public. There is still a long way to go, but the good news is that Japanese sports has recently made a historical pivot towards gender equality. In February 2021, the president of the Tokyo Organizing Committee of the Olympic and Paralympic Games resigned after being condemned for his out-of-date sexist comments. And the top position was succeeded by a female leader, with female members now making up almost half of the board. This is very encouraging, and I am hopeful. Many people ask me why I can be so courageous. So to conclude my speech, let me answer that question, introducing the Japanese women I most respect, who taught me how precious my life is. Her name is Misue Ogawa. She was born in 1919 in a small village of Gifu Prefecture, central part of Japan. Her family was poor, so she had to take care of their housework, returning from elementary school every day. And only after midnight was she able to start her homework. Upon graduation from elementary school, she was sent to a weaving factory to help her family financially, where she had to work from early morning to late at night. And even after she got married, her hard-working life continued because her husband was poor and also had to pay the debts left by his brother. In addition, she lost her baby to miscarriage, not once, but twice. But she didn't drive herself to despair and kept working harder from early morning until midnight. And when she got pregnant again, she decided to deliver her baby at the risk of her own life via C-section, which was a very risky procedure at the time. This time, she was finally able to meet her baby daughter, who grew up to lead a healthy and happy life. Then her daughter got married, and gave birth to another cheerful girl. That's me. I spent a lot of time with my grandmother, but never heard her blame her fate or consider giving up. Instead, she tried to find hope without letting obstacles in life stop her. She died several years ago, unfortunately. But her lessons live on through me and through the experiences I provide to help others. Ultimately, that grit and resilience is what we all need to succeed in life and on the basketball court.
When I was 7 years old, I was a Brooklyn Dodger fan. My dad asked me if I wanted to come meet Jackie Robinson. I had no idea who Jackie Robinson was in terms of his social significance, but he was the star of the team I rooted for. So of course I wanted to meet him, spent a couple of minutes with him. He and my dad were the co-keynote speakers at a fundraiser at Madison Square Garden. My dad was the coach of the New York Knicks at the time. And after it was over, Jackie went home to be with his wife, Rachel. I hope some of you have seen the movie 42, or the Ken Burns documentary portraying the great love affair between Rachel and Jackie. I'm happy to tell you that 49 years after this, I am the person who accompanies Rachel to the Jackie Robinson Foundation Gala. Every year, she's now 97 years old. She's a regal queen. If you ever have a chance to be in her presence, seize that moment. But back with my dad took the New York sports media to Mama Leone's restaurant near the old Madison Square Garden. He would spend as much time with the media as they wanted to. And as we got into the bar area, the most famous writer in America shouted across the bar, "Did you see that N? Showboating," referring to Jackie Robinson. And I'll never forget how tightly my dad gripped my arm and he said, "Some people only know how to hate." I grew up in that household. My dad, in 1950, was the coach of the New York Knicks and signed the first African-American player in the history of the NBA. I looked outside my bedroom window one afternoon and saw my dad's image swinging from a tree with people under the tree picketing. For several years after that, I had to pick up the extension phone at home with hate calls directed at my dad. I didn't know what any of it meant as a 5, 6, and 7-year-old, except a lot of people hated this man who was my best friend. And again, I would only learn later that it was because he had integrated the NBA. So my dad is a double inductee into the Basketball Hall of Fame. Everybody told me I was going to play in the NBA. I liked that idea a lot. I was one of the tallest players in New York City and was heavily recruited by a school called Power Memorial, which was one of the top basketball schools in the country. Didn't go there, became friends with the coach. He invited me to his summer camp the next year. There were 5 white guys and a black guy at the camp, all his players, and one of the white guys was dropping the N-word on the black guy from dawn till dusk till I finally challenged him. On the 3rd day, he literally knocked me out cold. The black guy's name at the time was Lou Alcindor, became Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. A lifelong friendship began, but what was important for me as a 15-year-old white kid coming from Yonkers, New York, I suddenly had a young, urban African-American lens with which I could see what racism was doing to his community and other communities of color. I decided at that moment that I was going to spend the rest of my life working in the area of civil rights. I didn't know what that meant as a 15-year-old, but I knew that's what I wanted to do. I ended up getting a PhD in international race relations and did my doctoral dissertation on how South Africa used sport as part of its foreign policy and the international response to it. Compared it to how the Nazis had done that in the 1930s. I was teaching in a college in Virginia. The dissertation was published as a book. I started speaking about apartheid and founded the sports boycott of South Africa. There was a bank loan boycott, an oil boycott, a trade boycott. You could smuggle all those things in, but you couldn't play sports in the dark. It became South Africa's Achilles heel. And its first team was coming to the United States in 1978. It was a Davis Cup team scheduled to play in Nashville, Tennessee. I went down to Nashville as the leader of the coalition of groups opposing the matches. And the African governments with whom I was working closely had asked me to announce they would boycott the 1984 Olympic Games if this team was allowed to come. I announced that at a press conference. All 3 networks covered, and Dick Schaap, a correspondent for NBC Nightly News, came up to me afterwards before I spoke to the Vanderbilt students and said the financial backers of the Davis Cup had pulled out. It looked like the matches were going to be canceled. I announced that to the crowd, which was an anti-apartheid crowd. They went crazy, and when I flew home to Virginia that night, I felt maybe for the first time in my life I'd done something worthwhile. The next night I was working late in my college office. The office was in the school's library. The library closed at 10:30. At 10:45 there was a knock on the door. I assumed it was the campus security checking because they saw a light on. Instead, when I opened the door, it was two men wearing stocking masks who proceeded to cause liver damage, kidney damage, a hernia, concussion, and carve the N-word in my stomach with a pair of office scissors. I knew that night, laying in the hospital, that if people had gone to the length they did to try to stop my father 28 years before, and to the length they did to try to stop me that night, that they must have thought that what we had been doing using the sports platform to address racism was having an impact that they didn't want to continue. And I decided I would spend the rest of my life using that sports platform to address various social justice issues, and that's what I've done. There are so many social justice issues that we've addressed through the sports platform. Racism is probably the biggest. I'm going to be with you for about 10 minutes today. During that 10 minutes, if it was a typical 10 minutes in America, 24 children dropped out of school, 8 children were victimized by violence, 14 children were reported missing, 6 babies were born to a teenage mother, 302 children were abused, 86 women or girls were battered, 13 were raped, and 19 were enslaved during this 10 minutes that we're here together today. The issue of human trafficking created an incredible personal experience for me as I joined my daughter Emily, who had become the director of UNICEF's program, End Trafficking, to form a partnership to do 40 programs on college campuses across the country in partnerships with their athletic department so that we use that sports platform to educate people on those campuses on the issue of human trafficking. We faced more than 74,000 people in the audiences that we encountered over those 4 years. But as a dad, to be able to do that with his daughter was one of the greatest periods of my lifetime. Emily has become my hero. We started writing racial and gender report cards in the late 1980s to track women and people of color holding senior positions in college and pro sport. This college report card had a lot of bad news. There were decreases for people of color as student athletes in the NCAA office, head coaches in Division I for all men's basketball teams and women's basketball teams, and all coaches in Division I and II. 83%, 91%, and 91% across all 3 divisions of our athletic directors are white men. This is not a good situation because they're making the decisions. And as if all that wasn't bad enough, we tracked back 10 and 15 and 20 years. In 2000, 77% of the administrators at the NCAA headquarters were white. Today, 76% are white. In 2010, 71% of the senior executives were white. Today, 68% are white. In 2005, 2006, 25.2% of men's Division I basketball coaches, one of the tournaments we're watching, were black. Today, it's 22.7%. It's gotten worse. In 2009, 2010, 7% of our Division I football coaches were black. Today, only 8% are black. How are we going to ensure that this doesn't keep happening for the next 20 years? How do we ensure that 20 years from now, somebody's not here bemoaning the fact that the numbers still haven't changed, that it's still all white men in leadership positions? I think we have to do racial and gender report cards for all the conferences individually so we see it school by school what the records are. We need to do diversity and inclusion training in all our athletic departments so we have a better understanding of how we can be a welcoming workplace for those people who do join us. We need to create a hiring practices rule that I call the Eddie Robinson rule. West Coast conferences call it the Bill Russell rule. The NFL calls it the Rooney rule, but it's to have a diverse pool of candidates for every major position that you're hiring for. And finally, to help support athletes as they become activists, to speak for themselves on their campuses that they want more people who look like them running the sports programs on their campuses. I think that will be the game changer in changing the numbers. Starting with racism, we're facing so many social justice issues it must feel overwhelming. But I can tell you that on May 10th of 1994, as his guest, I was standing on the steps of the Union Buildings in Pretoria to watch Nelson Mandela be inaugurated as the new president of South Africa. If this man, who had been a political prisoner in the most racist system of government on the face of the earth in the second half of the 20th century, could become its president, then all the things I talked about that we have to overcome, we can overcome. If our children have learned how to hate, we can teach them how to love again. If they're waging war on one another, we can give them the tools to make peace. I dream of a day when we're not ever going to have to say some people only know how to hate and instead live in a world where our children hear us say, all the people only know how to love.
How can ordinary people change the game? That's the question, and this is the answer. Ordinary people become extraordinary leaders when they are driven by unselfish hearts. That's where the change takes place. I have this opportunity today to speak to all of you simply because of a game changer in my life. My great aunt was that game changer. I grew up in the 50s, 60s, born in the late 40s. My world was legally segregated. It's the only world I knew. Picking, chopping cotton, working the fields of the Delta, hangover and after part of slavery. That was the world that was mine. That was the world that I thought I would know for the rest of my life. But my great aunt was determined that I'd get an education, and that required a lot of unselfishness on her part. I had to travel to high school 100 miles round trip every day for 4 years. I never missed a day out of school, graduated valedictorian of my class, because my great aunt would get up every morning before I would. She would stand on the front porch in a flannel gown and a head rag, and she would pull the string on a 60-watt light bulb. That was her signal to the bus driver that I was going to school that day. The bus driver never missed, my great aunt never missed, and neither one allowed me to miss. And today, I can say I'm a graduate of O'Bannon High School, Greenville, Mississippi, valedictorian of my class, because my great aunt was the game changer. Unselfishness makes ordinary people extraordinary leaders. You know, but she was not the only game changer. There were game changers throughout all of our lives. Average, ordinary people who became extraordinary because of the unselfishness that drove their acts. 2021 is an incredible year. It is also the commemoration of the 1921 race massacre and the devastation of Black Wall Street. We didn't expect Black Wall Street to be as significant as it was. Why? Because these men and women had just been released from slavery 30 or 40 years earlier, and now they have built a place that's an economic powerhouse. It was absolutely incredible. However, it wouldn't last forever. In 1921, May 30th, May 31st, and June 1st, Black Wall Street was totally destroyed, wiped off the face of the earth. And this is why, if we have a future that is racially just, that this will not happen again. When we're talking about Black Wall Street was destroyed in 48 hours. Everything that they had built, and they had built an incredible place. The hotels that they had built, the churches that were like cathedrals, they had hundreds of retail businesses that existed. All of these things were beyond belief because Mr. Stratford, who built the Stratford Hotel, he was born in 1861, born into slavery. But yet he had become a lawyer and an incredible entrepreneur. And this is what was left for us to look at, to admire, and to appreciate. But now it's gone. Destruction is sort of like death. It's very difficult to talk about what you had when all of a sudden it's no longer there. And for me, it reminds me of a time in my life in July of 1995. My wife and I had a little daughter, 7 years old. I went to sleep that night with the idea that I would wake up on July 4th and Aunt Catherine would be just fine. But she wasn't. She passed away in the night. So I know the feeling of sudden death, of destruction of your dreams, when all you have left are memories. Yes, that is what happened to us, and that is what happened on Black Wall Street. However, we had to learn how to become champions. For Aunt Catherine, we created a fund in her name. and we raise money throughout the country. And every year we send kids from Oklahoma with the sickle cell disease to camp in memory of our daughter. And similarly for the Black Wall Street builders, the scorched earth was there, the rubble was there, but they brought their tenacity, their courage, and their perseverance, and they began to build again. And by 1926, they had almost completely rebuilt Black Wall Street. It's amazing what can happen when unselfish hearts come together and become a team that can come back to win. But there are issues that still remain in our country: social unrest, political unrest, racial disturbances, unjustified deaths. There are so many things that remain, not unlike it was in 1863, when Abraham Lincoln stood at Gettysburg and made this incredible speech. But I remember one line of the speech that I think is just as important in 2021 as it was in 1863. "We are engaged in a great war," says Mr. Lincoln, "testing whether that nation or any nation, so conceived and so dedicated, can long endure. Well, the endurance of the nation does not depend upon the monuments that surround the Potomac, but they depend upon ordinary people just like us. They depend upon us to become the champions of the cause, to build the right culture, one where everyone is respected, affirmed, and included." Speaking of champions and championship cultures and how important that is to winning, how important that is to keeping the crowd with you, there's none better than Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls. I remember my very first time watching Michael Jordan play. When he came out on the court at San Antonio, thousands of people just cheered. It was the sound was so overwhelming that I couldn't even hear my heartbeat. All I could see were thousands of people and the name Michael Jordan, Michael Jordan, Michael Jordan, Michael Jordan. But then the buzzer sound. And when the buzzer sound, the team came onto the floor with him. And that helped me to realize and to remember that it is the team that wins the game. And so it is in life and the things we want to change and make better in our world. It is the team that wins the game. So how do we ensure a racially just world? We must become a team of game changers. The first thing I want you to think about is join with unselfish others along the way, because this will boast your unselfishness. Secondly, embrace and practice the unselfish habits of your heart. Know what these habits are, practice them, and become them for the benefit of others. And lastly, remember, we, me, you, we are the ordinary people. We are the game changers we see. And always remember to look to history as a guide as we march forward. History is indeed a great teacher, but we must attend class.
Well, this brings us to the end of an exciting few hours, lots of different ideas, lots of ways to make change, but ultimately it comes down to each and every one of us. From believing in people, to seeking mental health, to ensuring more diversity in everything we offer, to truly thinking of inclusion at all levels. It is for each one of us to make a difference, because what I've always believed is that one person with strength of character is a majority. One voice that speaks up against injustice can start a movement, and every one of us here looking to make a difference can change lives. So wherever you are, whatever you do, every small action matters, because collectively then we can all create a racially just future. Thank you all and be well. Until next year.